Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Thornburg, and this is the second part on my discussion about when we should start solid foods in infants. I have stated that I believe it's best to start at 6 months or after, and this talk is really to look at the growing popularity and mainstream medical community recommendation that we start solid foods after 4 months old with high allergen foods in order to decrease eczema and decrease the incidence of food allergies, severe food allergies. We are raising a child through a lifetime of developmental points and taking one section of a developing immune system and leveraging that between the 4 and 6 month old ages is not the best approach, in my opinion, to create a balanced, appropriately timed immune system as part of a whole child body development. So that's why I disagree with pitching it out. So let's get through it. So the immune system and the development of oral tolerance. So our GI tract has a unique ability in the immune system to create tolerance. And this is different than the immune system that sits in our skin. The immune system in our skin is not designed to develop tolerance. If we cut ourselves, we don't want to become tolerant to the dirt or the microbes or whatever it is that enters our body through the broken skin. We don't want to develop tolerance. We always want to say, you don't belong here. I'm going to attack you and I'm going to destroy you and I'm going to eat you and we're going to move on and we're going to heal the skin. So that's what you want from the skin immune system. But in the gut, because a baby will be learning how to live in their environment, and this includes food as well as just the different organic matter that lives around them, because babies put everything in their mouth. So it's not just food that goes in their mouth, but they also get the little pieces of dirt or cat hair or whatever might be in their environment. And the GI tract then uses that information and develops a tolerance to it. So the immune system doesn't necessarily attack it like the skin immune system does. The GI tract immune system will say, okay, you're a friend. We're not going to attack you when you come passing through. As a matter of fact, we're going to develop a relationship with this piece of information and we're going to present it to the immune system. The immune system is going to recognize it and we're not going to attack. And in some cases, if it's food, they will have a process to bring it inside through the wall and into the baby itself. And so that is in contrast to something that's not supposed to be there, and the immune system picks up on that and says, oh my God, you're not supposed to be here. Let's get rid of you as fast as we can, either through diarrhea, and we'll open up the floodgates and we'll send a bunch of water into the GI tract and we'll flush you out, or we will eat you there in the wall of the intestine and control it that way. You can see that our immune system, depending where it's located in the body, does different things. So the baby's immune system, starting at birth, is very naive. They just left the amniotic sac, which for the most part was sterile. While the baby was in mom, the mom's GI tract was sending some of the bacteria that lives in mom's GI tract into the amniotic fluid. So there is some very early kind of homeopathic level priming to the bacteria. And this is important for a couple reasons. One is mom and baby share 50% of the same DNA. So if it's working for mom, then that will likely work for the baby. So passing over those microbes from mom's gut into the baby's amniotic fluid is helpful in starting to regulate the immune system in a very soft way. It's like starting new foods. It's very simple, it's very small, and we're not doing a lot of it. When the baby is born, then the baby is born vaginally, and mom did not have group B strep, which means that she was not treated with IV antibiotics prior to delivery, then the baby will be, if you want to call it, inoculated with the bacteria that lives in the vagina. And this is important because the bacteria that lives in the vagina is very similar to the bacteria that lives in our guts. When the baby passes through the birth canal and ingest this bacteria, these bacteria have a certain role that other bacteria won't have, such as a baby who's born vaginally, but the mom received IV antibiotics because of group B strep, or the baby was born by C-section. So there's a different injection, if you want to call it that, of bacteria depending how the baby is born. So back to the vaginal delivery without group B strep, the baby then will ingest some lactobacillus among other bacteria, and those bacteria are what we call facultative anaerobes, which means they prefer to have an anaerobic, a non-oxygen environment, but if there is some oxygen there, they can use it, and this is beneficial to the baby's GI tract because they'll remove any oxygen, because the GI tract should be an anaerobic, an oxygen-free zone. And so they'll remove any oxygen that is still in the GI tract. And also they make acid. So the GI tract should be acidic. The acidic environment is beneficial because some of the bacteria that are not good for us don't like acidic environment, so it helps keep the pathogens or the bad bacteria out of this opportunity to colonize the GI tract. Because remember, it's like traveling to the new world, if you want to call it that, where the GI tract is uninhabited for the most part, and so bacteria that kind of homestead kind of find a place to live, and they can live there. And so we want to make that GI tract inhospitable for the bad bacteria and more hospitable for the good bacteria like lactobacillus. And so it's important for the GI development, the immune system development, to have this less inflammatory initial environment. To compare this to a Group B strep vaginal delivery or a C-section delivery, then we have different microbes finding an opportunity to inhabit the baby's GI tract. And so we will end up with bacteria that will not allow as fast of a decrease to the pH to make a more acidic environment. So then the pathogens can find, a homestead environment in these other two types of births. And then that just leads to increased inflammation because now we're altering a nice growing of the mucosal lining of the different bacteria that help us digest our food and make vitamins, of how the immune system is going to prime the underlying inside of the body's immune system. There's like tentacles that go out that present the different bacteria or food particles into us proper. Remember, the GI tract is a tube running through us. It is not part of us, just like a tunnel through a mountain that we drive through. The tunnel isn't part of the mountain. It's just a tube through the mountain that we drive through. And essentially that's what's going on from our mouth all the way down to our anus. It's just a tube running through us. And so the GI tract then has to pull out of that tube what it wants to keep and what should be moved on. And so looking at the different types of delivery, you can see that there can be a delay in the maturation of a proper environment for a baby's GI tract if the C-section or the Group B strep with IV antibiotics are administered as compared to a vaginal birth without antibiotics. So now that you're understanding that the GI tract's immune system and the skin's immune system are different, so now you can see why that's important, because that's how we're going to gather those bits of information. What the mainstream establishment is doing is they're saying, well, during that 4 to 6 month period of development, as the mucosal membrane, because there's a layer of mucosa that develops, kind of like snot, that develops right along the wall of the intestines. And this is really important because that is where a lot of the bacteria live, and that is also a barrier to the wall itself. So it creates basically a shield against what's passing through, so that mucky mucosal layer will harbor or host or house a lot of our different critically important microbes and immune cells that help keep the environment healthy by keeping, refreshing the mucosal membrane, because that mucosal layer will get old, and so it needs to be degraded, and then that allows new mucosa to be developed. And since the immune system is sending tentacles into this area to feed back into our immune system, provide information, that's really important that this whole area is in a low inflammation state and also has the proper architecture, because the baby's GI tract was developed appropriately. So the mainstream medical community, and specifically the pediatric allergist and the pediatric GI doctors, recommend this more than the general pediatricians. And I'm going to do an aside here, is general pediatrics, we look at the whole baby. We're general. We look at the whole baby developing from birth until they're 22 years old. And we're, as a subspecialist, somebody that is doing an organ system, such as an allergist or a GI doctor or a heart doctor or a dermatologist or a neurologist, they just silo into their specific field. So they become very adept at their subspecialty. They become very knowledgeable a mile deep, but their understanding of the baby through general development becomes narrowed. So that's what's happening here is they've taken an element that makes sense from inside of their specialty, but they're not looking at the whole baby as a developing organ system that needs to go through proper steps in order to develop in a right way. There are no shortcuts in life. If there were shortcuts in life, either God or evolution would have made it work that way. So it's kind of egotistical to think that we can just make it up on the fly because we have some cursory understanding of the human body after practicing medicine in this Western format for about 100 years or so. So, that's just an aside. But you can see my point is that there's some ego playing God here when you get into, well, I know my organ system, and so therefore I know everything, because that's where Frankenstein's monster is made, because you can't take parts and create a whole. That's where we don't understand what we're doing when we narrow down to such micro minutia and we forget that we're actually a human and not just a part. Enough of my soapboxing. What these subspecialists are doing is at this point between 4 months and 6 months old, the immune system isn't fully matured in the GI tract. The mucosal layer is not fully matured. The tight junction between the enterocytes, the gut cells, haven't fully matured and bonded next and with each other. So the baby basically also has leaky gut. And the effects of leaky gut is that larger proteins can enter inside of us proper, basically escape the tunnel and enter the mountain. Bacteria can do that too. So there is a lot of potential for unnecessary inflammation occurring during these crucial developmental windows. But what is also happening, and this is where these subspecialists are focusing in on, is that the T regulatory part of our immune system, and the T regulatory is just that, they regulate. They kind of keep a balance so one side of our immune system doesn't take off too hard against the other side. And so these T reg cells are at an elevated level because, again, all of this leaky gut's going on. So we don't want to overreact to everything. So the T regs are up. Allergists, the GI docs want these high allergen foods introduced because then the T reg cells will downplay the allergic response to these foods because they're going to hitchhike on the back of, well, we don't want to attack everything that is coming through our environment right now. We want to make sure that we don't want to attack our family cat, or we live on a farm and there's cows or there's dirt or there's siblings and they're bringing home bacteria and viruses from school or from daycare. And we want to know what kind of pollen is in our area and what kind of dust mites and everything else. So it's kind of learning how to live in the ecosystem. So it's pigging back by adding on this extra layer because it's not part of, again, the evolutionary process. It is not part of the grand design, if you believe in God, to take these foods at this point. It's there for a different reason. So we're taking these high allergen foods and we're piggybacking on what has been put there for a specific reason. And now we have to stop and look at what the baby's diet is and what mom's diet is. We have to start with mom first, because when we look at what mom was consuming while she was pregnant, if she was eating a diet, a standard American diet, a diet that is high in omega-6s, then the baby is also receiving these high inflammation omega-6s. And remember, the baby's brain isn't fully sealed off from the external environment like it is in those infants and children who are over 2 years old. And for the rest of us, there's a leakiness there. There's also a leakiness in the gut. And so the inflammation that comes from mom's diet is also causing inflammation in this developing fetus. So there is some kind of play happening here that can contribute to just a chronic state of inflammation starting from a very young age if mom's diet is, again, in an inflammatory inventory of food. And then the same is true when mom is nursing. If she has a high inflammation diet or a diet that is deficient in proper nutrients, and the baby then is not receiving milk that could be as complete as it could be, then the baby doesn't have all of the nutritional substrates or the nutritional minerals and vitamins to allow this developing organ system, the immune system, the GI tract, the nervous system, to be as functional and correct and moving along at a developmentally critical pace without risk of introduction of more inflammation. So mom's diet is hugely important. Now, I've mentioned mom's breast milk as a food source. I want to talk about breast milk, then I'll get into formula. So mom's breast milk has a lot of great elements in it that's really nutritious and beneficial to the baby in all of these developmental areas that I've already mentioned. So there is immunoglobulins in the breast milk that helps decrease the chance that the baby's going to get sick. It helps keep the GI tract free of bad bacteria that can cause an infection. Also, it helps clear the bad bacteria so they have a less chance to colonize the baby's GI tract. Some of these nutrients also will help the immune system develop appropriate responses to the microbes that are passing through. One is called HMO, human milk oligosaccharides. These are really beneficial to the developing immune system, and these nutritional markers also help build up that mucosal layer that I had mentioned. In addition, there is low chance of having a food allergy to mom's breast milk. I have seen it happen, but that is also just a rare episode, not something that generally happens. Now let's compare this to formula. Formula, and more so here in the United States, if you buy a US formula, is comprised of seed oils as one of the top ingredients. And seed oils are highly inflammatory. They contribute to that omega-6 profile that is also highly inflammatory. And again, the immune system isn't developed, the GI tract is leaky, the brain is leaky, the nervous system is immature, and we're adding in high inflammation seed oils that were highly processed, bleached, just a lot of terrible things that are unhealthy. And that's going in, and that is also altering then how the GI ecology is developing. The mucosal layer is not as robust. Now we have different bacteria setting up real estate holdings in the baby's GI tract because the environment hasn't been as acidic, because there's been more inflammation. So the early part of the immune system that was developed and developed enough to take action have been suppressed because of the inflammation in the area. So the whole system is not as healthy as what it could be.